Okay, thank you, Tamira, for hosting this session for us. My name is Brian Hudson. I'll be chairing the session, and we've got 3 papers, all addressing theme 3. And the first paper we will have presented by Marjeta, and she is addressing the question of how ready were schools, teachers, and students for distance learning in Europe, and is presenting evidence from large-scale assessments for primary schools. The second presenter is Donieta on the challenges of distance teaching in teacher education and education. And so far, I don't think Donieta has joined us, but hopefully will do so in time to present a paper. And then the third paper is a presentation that will be led by Vesna together with Anja and Tina, and that paper will address the question of can psychophysiology help to evaluate distance teaching. So we'll start with the first paper and with Marjeta, and the floor is yours, Marjeta.
The microphone is not on.
Yeah, I think you need to unmute.
Oh, hello. Can you hear me now?
You can now.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
So good afternoon, everyone. I miss that I cannot see you in person and to have lunch with you so we could speak a little bit together. This is one thing that I really miss during this Corona. I think the children in schools share the same opinion that this talk during lunch breaks and coffee breaks, this is something very, this is something that we miss a lot. So I hope you will, I would like to invite you to ask me clarifying questions during my presentation. So, because I would really like that we understand each other, which is a little bit difficult, even if we are all accustomed to this kind of conversations during the past year. I see my colleagues are also here, so I will present in the name of our group, and we will talk about how ready were schools, teachers, and students for distance learning in Europe. Of course, when countries collected this data, they were not aware that something like that is going to happen. So data is not, there is not really enough data, but we have enough data to say if schools were prepared for that or not. I don't see, it's going, yeah, okay. So where did we start? First, distance schooling was a fact in quite a few countries in Europe. For example, in Slovenia, in Austria, and in many other countries. Some countries did not use that model, and young children at elementary or primary, we are referring here to primary school, were at school all the time. So how can we distinguish this homeschooling with distance schooling? I think this is something very different. I mean, homeschooling is not jeopardized during this Corona, because I believe people who are homeschooling their children have done so already in the past. However, with distance schooling, we have quite a big problem, because with this big data, we have a lot of confirmations and proofs, or how to say that being at school is very important for social cohesion, not only because we are social beings and we need each other, but because social disparity are so very strong when children are not at school. From the, I will introduce this big data if you are not very familiar with them a little bit later, but at the beginning I would like to point out that from this big research is we already know how much 1 year at schooling counts. We know that children improve from year to year with their knowledge. However, we also know that 2/3 of these achievements that are improving from 1 year to another are due to the schooling year that children spend at school. And only 1/3 of achievements of additional test scores or whatever we call it is due to biological age. Now we do not know how much of these 2/3 have stayed there. We will be able to see that in the forthcoming years. There is also one additional assumption, or not assumption, a starting point that we would like to point out. And this is so-called summer learning loss. We know that students from disadvantaged families come to the beginning of the next school year with less knowledge that they have had when they finished their previous school year. But children who come from privileged families, and these are more or less children of educated parents, they come to the beginning of next school year with more knowledge that they gain when they finished the previous year. I hope this is understandable. So what happens, what I want to point out is that the big disparities are even bigger after the summer vacation. So this is something that we have to have in mind. And this is not a presumption, this is just a fact that comes from the data. Well, so what is this school effectiveness that we are talking about, or school preparedness? Because we have now two terms. School effectiveness is something that is already known, and it applies to the achievement and to well-being of children. School is successful, or school is effective if students gain knowledge in accordance to the expectations. So if the school teaches children as much or more than expected. So we have now, we have more models that we started with. One was especially leaned on ICT use and student achievement, because in the previous year, this ICT research was quite substantial in all areas of education. And we did not know yet then it would become so important. School readiness is another term that we did not have ready. I mean, we all know what is the preparedness of a child to start learning, but we don't know really how to define what does it mean school readiness. So we defined it as a good cooperation between students, parents, and school. And we checked school factors, for example, like ICT use, communication with parents, reading literacy levels of students, teacher readiness to teach on a distance, and so on. And then also home and school factors like ICT resources that children or students have at home, what kind of communication parents have with school, and also reading literacy and parents' education. These data that we are doing with come all from large-scale assessments. There are two big organizations in the world that do these big studies. One is IEA, and it's doing these researchers like TEAMS, PERS, ICCS, ICLS. I hope you know them, because these PERS, for example, is a big survey on reading literacy of 10-year-old children, and TEAMS is survey on mathematics and science knowledge. The other organization is OECD, which does PISA, which is more, popular in the press, but this we took into account PERS and TEAMS data from IEA organization. So we had these research questions of how is, for example, how is book distribution in population related to mathematical achievement of the population? How often fourth graders use computers for school-related jobs, and do parents feel well informed by the school about academic progress of their children? I would like to show you, if you are not familiar with the data, why these data are reliable. First off, because of methodology, but we don't have time really to go into that today. I would just like to show these numbers, how many students are participating in these studies. You can see in per study in each country there are at least, usually at least 4,000 students per country. For example, in Slovenia, where in one cohort there is 20,000 students, it means that 1/5 of them are participating in the study. And then we have TEAMS, which was done in 2019. Also such a big sample, and more than 4,000 students from each country usually participate. Countries that are listed here are European countries. There are, of course, in these studies are also non-European countries like and other European studies, because, for example, Russia is not here. Then we have countries from all over the world. Okay, so in these studies, for each student, we have achievements, we have tests, and this is not just a collection of points that that students gather. It's more complicated test design behind it. And then we have background questionnaires with a lot of data about student factors, home factors, teachers, and school. Because all these participants take quite extensive questionnaires, and on the basis of these questionnaires, then we know what factors are associated with a certain achievement at children. This slide, I was not really, I decided yesterday to put this slide into this presentation because it is so very common that teachers and scholars, researchers or university professors, they often say that mathematics is not really connected to socioeconomic factors and that mathematics is a common language and it's symbolic language and anybody can understand mathematics no matter what and regardless of the family factors. This is not true, and we can see that from the if you look at this picture, you see that these lines are specific countries, so one line per country. And we see that children who do not have books at home have much lower mathematical score in team study than students who come from more affluent homes where they have, for example, 100 or more than 200 books. And the steepness of these lines is quite severe. Let me tell you that you see on the left side that there are 500, 550, 600 points. And that the difference between the left and the right side is about, let's say, 100 points or 80 points or even more than 100. 40 points means the difference of 1 year that I mentioned at the beginning. So if we test children who are at the 3rd grade, for example, and they they are at 4th grade, let me say it from the beginning. We test children from the 4th grade who are 10 years old, and then we again test children who are at the 5th grade and they are 11 years old. If we compare the achievements of these two populations, we would get 40 points of difference. And this is well researched by many researchers. So we can then see that the difference from the left to the right side, or the difference between students who have books and students who do not have books at home, is about 2 years, more or less in every country. Then we may ask, why are these, and this is mathematics, the same pattern applies also for science and for reading literacy. So it's not, it's much easier, I would say, to teach students from the right side of this picture than from the left side of the picture. Because when you apply new concepts, then you have something to lean on. Children from more educated families have, of course, more knowledge, not only about reading literacy, but also about mathematics and science as well. Okay, so why is then so that countries are at so different averages or they are at, how to say, at different points on that ladder of successful and less successful countries? We see that proportions of specific socio-economic groups are quite different in specific countries. We have so-called elite, or how to say, privileged children who come from educated and more economically stable families in every country. And these children have a lot of knowledge about reading literacy, about mathematics and science. However, in some countries, you can see, for example, on the left side, we have Albania. In Albania, there is roughly 50% of students at the grade 4 who basically do not have books at home. And then, for example, if you check Czech Republic or Norway or Northern Ireland, these groups are really, really small. So now we can better, if we see how big and small are specific socioeconomic groups, and this is just one example. For a more serious analysis, we would take into consideration other factors as well. But number of books is a very good, with number of books, we can show quite well how this pattern works. Okay, let's go back to our distance learning at schools. So we have this picture of how often do students use computers for school assignments. And we see that in some countries, they, well, there are different shares here as well. And in some countries, they use computers for schooling. They used computers for schooling when children were at school, or a teacher gave assignments and homeworks to the children on a daily basis, or some of them never. So how does this affect knowledge of, how is this not affect, but how it is related to the knowledge of children? We can see here, for example, in Austria, because it's on the left side and it's easier to follow. Here is Austria, and for example, in Austria, we see that about 70% of students never or almost never use computers for school assignments. And what do we see here? These students have the best mathematical achievement. So it is not really necessary. Well, we can interpret that in many ways, but we see that students who did not use computers at the grade 4 did not fall behind. On the contrary, practically in every country, the pattern is the same. Less use of computers is related to, but this is just correlation. This is not a causation. This is correlation that less use of computers is related to better knowledge of mathematics. Then our second question, also our third question about how well informed are parents from the side of the school about the progress of their children. There were quite a few questions about this. there were questions like school keeps me informed, or school takes a good care of improvements of my child, and so on. And we can see here that more or less parents in Europe, as they said, are more or less satisfied with that. So they think more than half, and in some cases even 90% of parents agree with that a lot, and just agree another 20 or 30 or 40%. So there are basically really not many parents who would not be satisfied with the school communication with them. And this is quite crucial for distance schooling, because at the grade of 4, why is this so important? Because we know from the reading literacy study that there are merely 1/3 to 1/2 of students at the age of 10. So at the 4th grade, only 1/3 to 1/2 of the students in a country have enough high reading literacy that they are able to learn by reading. And
3 minutes to go.
3 minutes to go.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so and all other kids are not capable of learning by themselves, even with the help of a teacher. Okay, so now we have 3 minutes for conclusion and for discussion. So what have we found out? 4th graders did not use computers for school-related work, but when they did, everyday use was negatively related to mathematical achievement. Then there are big differences in achievements of students according to parents' participation of communication. And the more parents are satisfied with that communication, it doesn't mean that the school performance of children is better. There are quite few possible relations in this regard. As I said, because most students at grade 4 are not reaching reading levels appropriate for independent learning, parents are crucial in this process. I think this is one of the most important things, that according to this summer learning loss assumptions, during lockdown, children from lower SES families are really jeopardized. And the next cycles of births and teams may show bigger disparities between students from different SES groups. And it's very, it's very useful to have this trend data for each country. But some countries, unfortunately, like for example, Slovenia, they have stood out of teams. So we will not have, in Slovenia, they will not have really good data about how Corona crisis affected mathematics and science learning, but they will have some about reading literacy, because PIRLS is, as I understand, PIRLS 2021 is on the way. Okay, that was my presentation. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Marjeta. That was a very interesting presentation. Has anybody got any questions of clarification? What I propose is that we take any questions of clarification now, and we move to a final discussion session where more detailed discussion can take place at the end of the paper sessions. So if anybody has got a question, could you raise your hand now or ask the question? Okay, so I'll assume that we're okay to move on. Now, we've found out that the second paper presenter has not been able to make it today. So what I'm going to propose is that we move directly to paper session 3. That is Vesna together with Anja and Tina. And and then they will have 20 minutes for presentation, and then we can move into questions for clarification and general discussion. So the floor is yours, Vesna.
Yeah, so thank you. So I teach at the Faculty of Education, and I am happy to introduce our young researchers. Anja is a postgraduate student of primary teaching education at our faculty, and Tina is a cognitive science student from master degree. And our study uses one of the objective measures, physiology, to assess the effects of pandemic. And Anja and Tina will introduce our research on distance teaching in primary school, which is actually a part of a larger project in collaboration of two faculties, our Faculty of Education and Faculty of Electrical Engineering. So I will share the screen, and Anja, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. So the title is Can Psychophysiology Help to Evaluate Distance Teaching? Okay. Okay, thank you. So here we made you a brief timeline of our presentations, So we will start with an introduction. Then we'll say a few words about learning approaches that we used in this research. We will also play you a video how we use those approaches in class. And at the end, we will present you results that we put it into groups, one from the side of knowledge and teaching, so maybe my side, and the other from the side of psychophysiology. So for the end, we saved a few open questions and suggestions for further researches. Okay, our goal was to compare frontal teaching approach with creative movement approach. And because of the situation and circumstances with COVID, we also included the distance teaching as the third approach. Our research was done in this school year, so 2020-21, in 5th grade. We had 23 learners, and we were working on this research from October till this March. And yes, maybe one important thing to say is that we taught subject science and technology.
Okay, so besides all of this, we also observe psychophysiology of students and also of teachers. Basically, we focused on looking for interactions between physiology and psychology. We were looking for how a certain person, event, certain experience can also be shown in his or her physiology. So when we are talking about this, we are talking about emotions, stress, cognitive load, because we can see them as somebody is experiencing them, but also we can measure them with certain measures, and we can see the physiology that is changing. So yeah, those physiological bodily changes are involuntary, we cannot control them, are a part of autonomous nervous system. There are things such as heart rate, blood pressure, breathing, electrodermal activity, or we can say like sweating. And yes, in our research, we were measuring those things with SenseAware Body Buck. It's basically a bracelet that we put on the upper arm, such as this on this photo. And throughout our research, the children and also the teachers were wearing those.
Okay, yes. So those braces were worn while we were teaching in 3 different ways. So we used 3 different approaches that you will also see in the following video that we promised you. We have to say that we did our best for each lesson, for each approach. So even the frontal, maybe more sedentary lesson was not boring, and it also included some experiments and group work, what is typical for subject science and technology. With the creative movement approach, there was a lot of meaningful movement, and we predicted that the pupils will learn more while using this approach that has roots in embodiment and kinesthetic learning. The third approach, teaching on a distance, was in front of the screens, and we also tried, yes, again, to do our best to make it interesting and to include some kind of a experiment, to have fun with miming things and to include children as much as we could. So you can see here in the picture, in the up left corner, our sedentary lesson or frontal teaching approach. In the left down corner, you can see creative movement approach. And actually in the first picture, children tried to show how water is flowing down the earth towards the sea. And the smaller picture right next to it is presenting how they learned actually about using this creative movement approach. They were trying to embody drinks in different glasses. And yes, the last picture here in the center, this is me while leading a lesson on M-Teams. So now it's time to take a look at the video that shows the highlights of our lessons.
Pogosto primajo na kapljice v bistvu dežja in te kapljice padajo na tla. Padajo kamorkoli, v bistvu po vsem svetu, na zemljo in zopet na tak način onesnažujejo. Ne samo, ker izpušni plin gre iz avta, ampak zato, ker se potem prime na kapljice dežja in te kapljice padajo na zemljo. Na ta način z izpušnimi plini tudi onesnažuje. Redo, zdaj pa drugi razlogi. Dija, manjši posodici. Lahko izložite ven, vendar še vedno poslušate. V eni posodici je nekaj podobnega, kot smo imeli prej, kot sem imela prej, in sicer kaj? Kako bi se rekli? V drugi posodici pa si dobro ogledajte, kaj je čista večja posodica.
Mi imamo manjšo posodico, pa izbijemo.
Mogoče zahodnih kozarcev, nizek mogoče pačka, te kaj še tak, zdaj prečistite, posamezen delec vode predstavljal na tak način. To je dogovorjen znak za delec vode. In ves čas, ko govorimo o vodi in o delci vode, stojiš tako v redu, v bistvu lahko se boš bal o navodilih zopet. V redu? Še vedno ste vodna para. Še vedno predstavljate delce vode v vodni pari. Roke so narazen, predstavljate delce vode. Gibate se v resnici zelo hitro. Gibate se hitro. Ja. Ozračje se počasi ohlaja.
Pomivanje rok, higiena, čistota.
Četrta stvar.
Za to vse je potrebna voda.
Nalili ste si ga že. Sedaj pa vodo v kozarcu opazujte, malo povohajte, okusite in mislim, da je v vseh kozarcih pitna voda.
Okay, so hopefully you enjoyed our video. Maybe for those that don't understand Slovene, I can explain that this last thing in the video was actually our little experiment in which the pupils had to pour themselves a glass of water and then try, smell and taste the water in their glasses. So this was a little experiment made on the distance. And if we go on and start with our results, what we actually wanted to know from the side of teaching and knowledge is how did pupils feel during the different lessons and what did they think about creative movement approach, and also what whether their thinking about the subject science and technology changed from before to after we did our lessons. The second thing we wanted to find out was if there is a difference in knowledge progress between those three approaches, and what is actually the sustainability of their knowledge in connection to those approaches. Okay, so results show that firstly, children liked the creative movement approach and that they felt good no matter the lesson or the approach used. So this probably confirms that our lessons were well prepared. The third point tells us that the approach didn't change actually children's opinion about the subject, science and technology. And after the interview with the teacher, it became more clear why, because she said that they do a lot of experimental work with her students in class, and that they rarely sit and write while learning this subject. So they actually had a really good opinion about it in the first place, even before we started to doing anything. The fourth and fifth point may be most intimidating ones, most intimidating results, shows us that the pupils actually had similar loss of knowledge as there was a gain of knowledge in our lesson for distance teaching. The gain of the knowledge we measured with G factor. That is actually a statistical measure of gained knowledge, and to get to this, we had to give children a pre-test and post-test after the lessons, and then we compared the percentages of points they achieved on pre-test and post-test. So this gave us that G factors. We also did those post-test after 4 months. So this is the way we checked the sustainability of their knowledge. And this is actually what the table on this slide shows you, that even though that the last lesson, so Water on Earth was its title, and we learned this lesson on the distance, even though this lesson was actually the easier one, the easiest one. They gained the same amount of, or similar amount of knowledge as they lost after 4 months. So this is a bit concerning. And if you look at the other G factors, actually, they didn't lost all of the knowledge in other lessons. We asked ourselves why, and yes, maybe this is due to lack of experimental learning that cannot be done in the same way on the distance as it can be done in class, and maybe lack of some cognitive conflicts, group work that also cannot be done in the same way on the distance as it can be done in class.
Okay, 3 minutes left.
Okay, so as I already mentioned before, we also measure psychophysiology of children and students. We focused on skin temperature, body heat flux, energy expenditure, and electrodermal activity. Those measures can be explained or interpreted as, for example, skin temperature and body heat flux. The lower they are, this means that somebody is under a lot of pressure, stress, or situations that the cognitive load is very high, so very difficult. Energy expenditure is self-explanatory. And the third one, electrodermal activity, is basically connected with arousal, the mental arousal. So basically when children were very excited, the arousal was higher. Why? We decided to check physiology, so to get a better insight of cognitive process of learning, of the influence of higher or lower cognitive load, and if movement is actually has any effect on learning in primary school. Throughout the research, we did several different things with those measures, but one of the most interesting ones is EDA synchrony. If I can just briefly explain, that means that we were taking at least 2 different signals from EDA synchrony, and if those were changing in the same way, so basically we're going at the same pace, we would say, well, they are synchronized. But if they went in totally different directions, we would say, well, they are the signals are very different. One is going up, the other one is going down. So probably they were not paying attention on the same thing. So yeah, it was not all that easy. We did several different analyses, but at the end we decided that that calculating the correlations in between 2 different signals is most promising and gives kind of logical results. So the first, in this graph, you can see a few bullet points, but yeah, every point represents the correlation in a certain minute. The higher one, so if you remember from the video, the first one is teacher performing mime and observing drinking water. From this, we can see that the correlation is very high and positive. We can say that for those 2 and 3 minutes, the signals were synchronized. So they were going at the same pace and they were moving in the same way. Different thing happened when they were watching a video about water on Earth. In that time, the synchronization was completely off. So the signal was, the teacher signal, Anja's, was very high, and the signal from children was at the same pace. It was not changing much. And we were asking our teacher what happened with you, and she told us, well, the internet connection was difficult. I was frustrated and I was worried what will happen. And because of that, her signal was very different. Children were stable, and we got the negative result. So not negative result, negative correlation, and this kind of fits with our theory. So yeah, in general, we can say that we got a lot of different informations, a lot of different results. We were doing this synchrony thing for all of the approaches, and we got results that are basically comparing the approaches, but our general observations for distance learning approach are that there is a lack of experience learning, that there is less opinion exchange, that there is a lot less communication or any interaction between subjects in general. Other results we can say that comparing G factors, as Anja mentioned before, we found that creative movement approach is the most effective, so children learn the most. And then we also found significant differences for heat flux, energy expenditure, and for EDA, which briefly I can just say that we found that heat flux for the distance learning approach showed that the children were more relaxed, they were not anxious, they were not under stress, chill, I guess. They didn't use much energy, so basically they were just sitting down. And we also found that with EDA, that they were not very their activation was very low. So we don't know, maybe they were bored or they were just not very into it. They were not paying as much attention. We also found some interesting results about special needs children. In our group, there were a few children with learning difficulties and one child with ADHD. And we cannot conclude anything from this, but we found that their physiology is a bit different from the other children. So yeah, at the end, we can say that this study actually showed that psychophysiology can help to evaluate the distance learning approach. But yeah, it showed us how psychophysiology is different in every approach, and also that knowledge retention is different for when we are using a certain approach, but also it gave us a few more questions than answers, let's say. And yeah, we can say that we can ask ourselves, what are the best and worst methods in distance learning approach? We showed some of them. And then again, are students really more relaxed while working from home, or is it something different that maybe they are not doing their schoolwork? And the third one, do lack of movement and less energy expenditure affects students' learning? So as we said, the students learned most when they were moving, and they forgot a lot of things while they were studying from home. And the last one is psychophysiology and children with special needs, or a child with ADHD. So there's a lot of possibilities for researching this in the future. And yeah, this is all from our side, and thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your attention, and we are open to the discussion.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Very interesting presentation. Does anybody have any questions of clarification, first of all? Then if not, what I suggest is that we start the general discussion. So consider questions both to Vesna and Anja and Tina as one presentation, and also to Marjeta for the first presentation. So either type the questions into the chat or show your hand, and we can take any questions that you have. Okay, just whilst we're formulating questions, one question I've got really to both presenters, both sets of presentations. What would be, how would you summarize the implications of your study for teacher education policy? What would you say to a decision maker or a policy maker arising from your study? What's the real core of the implications for future policy making? And also you might consider practice, practice in terms of implications to other colleagues in the field. We take Vesna, do you want to?
Yeah, I think from our research, we could find out that it's very important that we use active approaches to teaching and learning. I think that means experiential work, social gathering, like you could see embodied learning, using your whole body, so that kids are really engaged. So I would say active learning approaches, different active learning approaches are very important, which on distance teaching and learning, we could use some of them, but yeah, but you never know how active kids on the other side of the screen are, really are. So maybe Tina and Anja or Jerneja or Gregor, because we have a bigger research group, would add something else.
Would you like to add anything? Anja, Tina? No. Marjeta, from your perspective, what would be the summary?
Thank you very much for this question. I always wonder how we can overcome that, because there are hundreds, if not thousands, articles every year around the world talking about socioeconomic factors and their effects on learning and teaching. However, especially in Europe, we do not see any substantial improvements in this regard. I often think, like a sociologist, why is this so? Maybe it's just the human factor that we are not able to overcome, because all people with power, politicians, educators, researchers, university professors, all those who have chances to do something, actually are in this elite group, and all their children are in so-called, advantaged group, or in general. Of course, there are individual cases. This is not one-to-one, this is statistics. It means there is a pattern there. So all children who come from these advantaged families do not have that chance that they would finish universities, but in general, it is like that. So I always wonder, do we only talk about the social economic disparities because, I don't know, to show that we are socially aware or politically aware, but when there is a time to really to do something, are we willing to share what our children and grandchildren have and to give these benefits of society to somebody else at the expenses of our children? So yeah, I don't have really a good answer to that, but I think there is a lack of force or willingness in the society to really do something about it. Not only in my own surroundings, but in whole Europe. Because, for example, there in these big data studies, we can see that in Asia, they can do differently. And we are all, often so, how to say, we perceive ourselves like we do know better, and we actually do not know anything about Asian countries. But they have some really good examples of how you can overcome these social disparities. Because, for example, from Pearl's study, we know that in Hong Kong, it does not really matter if your father works on a boat or your father is a university professor, because children from both groups have really good reading results. So there are a lot of things that need to be talked about in our societies. Yeah, so thank you very much for this question.
Thank you. Any observations? Yeah.
If I may add something else.
Please do, yes.
Yeah, I'm like a part of the group who did the last. I mean, I was not really doing anything. Anja and Tina were doing everything. But I think one of the important things in science is that that we show the society and the decision makers what could be done and what are some findings. I mean, there will never be like a generally accepted finding. If you are doing distant teaching or learning, then you should do it this way and so on. But I think it's really important that the science shows that it can be done, and that there are like 70% of scientific papers telling you that you should use MIME and that you should use different gadgets and artifacts to engage children. And if there are 30% of other papers saying that this is not helpful, then so, I mean, it's the way the science works. And I think it's quite important that a lot of, especially in such enormously interdisciplinary studies like this is, which is always a problem and a challenge really. It's really important that it's there, that the dissemination of the knowledge should go around and people should hear about it. And then after a while, also the decision making and all these bureaucrats and paper pushers would get used to the idea that this is the fact. And then I think this is quite important. And that's why it's, I mean, I'm from totally other universe really, coming from electrical engineering, but I see it every day with my kids. And I think that's the important message. We should not be quiet. We should do research. And sometimes it doesn't work and sometimes it works, but it's really important. And this is the only way that the decision-making persons will see it. And after a while, also include it in strategies and programs and protocols and so on.
Thank you. Thank you. Any further contributions, comments?
I think that both presentations were really interesting. We get some ideas for further research as well. Some questions arise. For example, I asked Marjeta about the relation between homeschooling and the impact of distance teaching or distance learning on homeschooling students and so on. So this might be an interesting but very difficult thing to research, for example. And also what it was mentioned, this socioeconomic status of families, of children, it plays a very important role in student life, access to certain devices and so on. So as it was said, Slovenia will be part of the PIRLS in 2021, but not in teams related to mathematics and science, but this would be very interesting also to see. We are doing some studies related to how students felt during the pandemic, how they work on science and technology subject and so on. So the preliminary results, for example, show that they were missing this real experimental work, which was also mentioned before by our group, Vesna, Tina, and Anja. So this is also very important that the students gain practical experiences in this. So yeah, at this point I would like to stop, but I just wanted to share with you some ideas which came to my mind.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Any further comments, observations, questions? One question that came to my mind when we're having the second paper, you were emphasizing that the online learning was less active, and it made me, and less involving in terms of group work. It made me think about, have you given thought to ways in which that sort of online learning experience might become more collaborative or more interactive? You know, from the experience that you had of researching it to this point, has that prompted you to think further about the ways in which that online learning environment might become more interactive, more collaborative?
Do you have in mind, for example, working groups, or that students get instructions and they do some experiments by themselves? This was the part of the study which was done.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about things like breakout rooms. Things like that. Have you got into, given that you've got this strong interest in active and experiential learning, have you tried to transfer some of those ideas into the online environment?
I mean, to some extent, if I understand your question correctly, it was included. Like it was said by Anja, these were not typical frontal teaching. They were somehow engaged, but it was different from the lessons which take part in the real classroom.
Yeah.
And maybe just another example from another research we made it in this COVID situation. It was that we also invited pupils to be involved with their whole body. So they were not just sedentary learning and teaching, but they stood up and moving with their body as well. So I think as we are speaking about embodied cognition, it was also more active, more engaged for kids. So that's one option too, because we all know that sitting 5 to 7 hours in front of the computer, it is not really motivated, and so on and so on. So this is maybe one example because we made it and it has good results. So for example, teaching through the arts of dance and embodied the curriculum.
Yes, I must say, as a grandparent, I've seen some very creative uses of the teaching of music and ballet dancing through Zoom in ways that I wouldn't have imagined previously. So,
I think teachers were really magicians to invent.
Okay, any further comments, observations or questions? We've run for over an hour with the two presentations, and we did have 3 planned. So if there aren't any further questions or observations, I'd like to say thank you very much to our presenters, 2 very interesting presentations, thought-provoking, and we all go away with things to reflect on and think about. And thank you to everyone who has attended. And as a small reward, you'll get a longer coffee break or tea break, however you want to spend it. So thank you very much, and we'll end it there. Thank you.